Okay, so I'm here to explain what happens when Jupiter goes into the 8th house into our birth chart. So let me start by explaining what is the 8th house. The 8th house represents our spouse, our husband or wife's family. It represents their wealth. It represents sex. It represents death. It represents the occult knowledge, mysticism, astrology, and tarot, and Reiki healing, and all that cool mystical stuff. It represents taboo, hidden knowledge, things hidden beneath the surface. Sex is something that is not really publicly seen unless you're a porn star for the most part. It's something that's usually done behind closed doors. Even maybe like in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, or 80s, sex wasn't really on TV. They would cut away from it. But now sex is everywhere, but normally sex is not really out there in the open for the most part. Death is, I don't know. This is a house of transformation. Death can transform and change someone's life. Negative sexual experiences like sexual assaults and all that can be a cause of transformation in your life. This is a house originally ruled by Scorpio and Mars. And that's about it for the 8th house. The Jupiter can represent a husband in a woman's birth chart. Jupiter can also represent children, which is something that I forgot to mention in regards to my other Jupiter videos in the houses. But Jupiter can represent children also. Jupiter represents a guru. Jupiter represents a philosopher. It just represents some just divine wisdom. It's not that type of knowledge and intellect like Mercury, which is more so mathematical and calculative. Jupiter is more so liberal arts and well-rounded education. A good, well-placed Jupiter in your birth chart can make you a great astrologer or tarot or Reiki healer and all that good stuff. Yeah, Jupiter represents our belief systems. That's basically what Jupiter is, short and simple. So when you put Jupiter into the 8th house, one thing you might see is that you might attract a spouse who might come from a large family, because Jupiter is expansion. And the 8th house is your husband or wife in their family. So he might come from a large family. He or she. Jupiter in the 8th house, your partner might have a whole bunch of hidden wealth. Or the partner might just appear that they are wealthy. They might just appear that they are just real financially good. It's going to be one of those three that I just said. Because Jupiter represents expansion. It can represent abundance. Jupiter doesn't really signify wealth, in my opinion. That's more so Venus. But it can bless you with wealth, or bless you with just enough wealth to make it to maybe the next bill, to your next paycheck or whatever. So those are some of the things that might happen with your spouse financially. You or your spouse, but mainly you, could have a huge sex drive in the marriage. Because the 8th house it also represents sex. But I guess you could say it represents more so the sex life of the marriage, while the 5th house could just probably represent sex in general. So you could have a large sexual appetite, depending on if maybe Jupiter is debilitated or not, or if there's other planets sitting in the 8th house or other planets aspecting Jupiter. You might be prone to having a whole bunch of possible sexual affairs outside of the marriage, outside of your relationships. You could be prone to just having this huge sexual appetite and want to explore and be with other people sexually. Even though I don't explain how someone might meet their husband or wife, meet their husband for a woman if they have Jupiter in their houses, because you gotta look at more than one thing for that. I'm gonna just do it for this house because I just feel like it. I really have no logical explanation. A woman who has Jupiter in the 8th house, she would meet her husband in a secretive It would just be secretive. It would be low key. The world wouldn't know about the relationship, and maybe you might hide your husband from your family for a while, you know? It'd probably just be a secretive relationship, and not too many people would probably know, or the family wouldn't just know about the marriage, about the relationship. Another thing that you'll see with Jupiter in the 8th house is that this person will be very good at just doing, you know, doing all the type of things I said that Jupiter, that the 8th house represents, which is astrology and tarot and just being a healer. Because Jupiter, it originally rules the 9th house and the 12th house. The 12th house is like spirituality, and the 9th house is like book knowledge and finding God and philosophy and religion and some little specks of spirituality and all that. So Jupiter, it just has the divine knowledge, the proper guidance, the proper intelligence of going about learning and practicing and teaching occult-like stuff. So here, you know, someone would just be very great at learning or practicing and teaching all the things I just said: tarot, astrology, mysticism, and all that stuff. These people can just be a natural healer of some kind, some way. You see, Mars originally rules this house, and Mars is a planet that represents taking action, that represents weapons and knives. It's a masculine planet. It's all about penetrating. You know, men, we have penis, and we penetrate a woman. So Mars is very penetrative, but it's not very intelligent, you know. So Scorpios and, you know, Mars and 8th house people, they might have a desire to want to learn and practice the occult knowledge, but they might not go about learning it and practicing it the proper way. It would be like the equivalent of some archaeologists or whatever digging up tombs in Egypt, not knowing all the things and bad karma and luck they might be unfolding on themselves, digging up people's graves, and, you know, they look at the hieroglyphics on the walls and these ancient texts on tablets, and they might not properly understand the message behind these words and texts and scriptures. Because Mars isn't really, you know, Mars isn't really intellectual. It's just it's a penetrator, it's a cutter, it's a digger. It just digs up the hidden knowledge, but it doesn't really quite understand it. It's not really qualified to comprehend it and teach it. But Jupiter is able to read and comprehend the hidden knowledge of the 8th house, the hidden dark texts or whatever, the spiritual arts, the mystical arts in regards to the 8th house that Mars wouldn't be able to properly understand or execute. So some with Jupiter in the 8th house, they are very just naturally gifted and prone to properly understanding all those mysticisms and astrological type things. And that is just about it when it comes to Jupiter in the 8th house. Very simple placement. Hope that this helped you, gave you some clarity and whatnot, and thanks for watching.